Hey folks, and welcome to the Iron Sysadmin Open Source News Recap for the week of October 24th. Hey folks, I had a quick thing I wanted to tell you about before we get started on today's show. And that is that if you're in the northeastern PA area, then on November 8th, you're going to want to come out to the DEF CON 610 Hacker Pub Crawl. It's a CTF where we visit a bunch of pubs and restaurants within the Easton, Pennsylvania area, and there's a bunch of hacker challenges set up. Some of them are physical challenges, like can you shim your way out of handcuffs? Or there's technical challenges. I've personally made a Linux challenge on this Raspberry Pi right here, which I think you will have a lot of fun trying to solve. So I don't want to waste your time with an advertisement, but this is a thing that I'm involved in, and I think you're going to want to come out to it. So come on out to the DEF CON 610 Hacker Pub Crawl. I'll put a link for more information in the description of today's show. All right, let's get back to it. It's been a little bit of an eventful week, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk at least a little bit, probably more than a little bit, about the AWS failure from the beginning of this week. That's right, overnight from Sunday night into Monday morning, folks woke up to a whole bunch of services inaccessible. And I mean services like Signal, Fortnite, Roblox, right? Somewhere around 2 in the morning, issues started to occur in AWS's East region. That's the Northern Virginia data center. And it was felt through the entire internet. I've got opinions on that, but first let's talk about what happened. So the article that I'm referencing here is from Forbes. They've used information from AWS's own incident report that they have published to talk about the incident. This all started with an issue with AWS's DynamoDB service, which caused a cascading failure. Between 11:48 p.m. on October 19th and 2:40 a.m. on October 20th, Amazon's DynamoDB experienced increased API error rates in its Virginia US East 1 region, the main region for deploying applications. So this region must be the backbone for the DynamoDB or maybe all applications deployed on AWS's infrastructure. So it sounds like it's already an important piece of their infrastructure, maybe a single point of failure. I don't know if you want to call it, if it's not quite that bad, but okay, the issue was caused by what they're calling a latent defect in the service's DNS management. That's right, DNS. Isn't it always DNS? This led to queries for services endpoints to return empty, right? So basically, a service depends on DNS to do an endpoint lookup to figure out how to reach DynamoDB or whatever services that it's trying to use. In today's era, this is a really common thing. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is if DNS is flaky or if DNS returns the wrong information, that turns into a stored request in the DNS cache on whatever asked for it. Now, DNS caches can be configured to be very short-lived or very long-lived, and that's a performance thing that people design into their application, right? So if I want DNS requests to be cached for a very short amount of time, it means I'm requesting it more frequently. If I want them to be cached for longer because I don't expect the DNS queries to change that often, which is most DNS queries in the world, then I would set that to longer, and you make fewer requests to the DNS infrastructure. The downside to that is if the request comes back faulty for whatever reason, whether it gives you the wrong address or an old address, or it comes back empty like it did here, that'll get cached. And then the next time that service tries to look up that same query, it'll get the same result. Even when the service is repaired, there's this long tail of issues that still happen whenever DNS is the problem, which is why in these large outages, we always see DNS as a recurring theme, because DNS is one of those things that when it's not working right, it causes a whole bunch of issues. Okay, let me get back on point here. This apparently led to high traffic on network load balancers And this led to health check failures on that service, on the network load balancers, right? So I could imagine that what that means is the health checks started to do things like try to resolve issues on the network load balancing services, right? So maybe that actually introduced more chaos into the mix. Sometimes the things you do or the automation that tries to fix the problem actually makes the problem worse because it's responding to data that maybe was faulty or maybe was too rash, right? And then at the same time, new EC2 instances started failing to start up in that region, right? So even once they were created, if they did actually get created and start up, they had network issues and probably DNS resolution problems because of the aforementioned DNS problems and the load balancer problems and all the things that had sort of led up to this point. Which of course then this led to even more network load balancer issues. I don't know if network load balancing, the service on AWS, is dependent on EC2, and maybe that's why the EC2 instances not being able to start were causing network load balancer problems. I could believe that would be a related issue because I could imagine a network load balancer being an EC2 instance that's running on like a Linux box or something, right? And if you can't start EC2 instances, then you can't start network load balancers, and that just compounds the problem. So there is linked in the Forbes article a write-up to AWS themselves about, sort of the postmortem that they've published. So if you want to know more than just the quick summary that I ran through there, then go check that out. But I did have a couple of opinions that I wanted to go through here. If you look back at the history of the Iron Sysadmin podcast, that is the show that I ran for years with a couple of my friends and colleagues, where we talked about IT infrastructure and whatnot, you will notice a recurring opinion out of me about our dependence on clouds, and that everyone seems to think that we can't do it ourselves, so we should put it on a cloud provider because they'll do it for us, right? And I'm not going to say that that has no merit. Obviously, cloud providers are popular for a reason. IT infrastructure is expensive, and it takes up a lot of space, and it takes a lot of money to run and buy and maintain, and when things fail, you have to have staff to fix them, and it's really, really, really attractive to pay someone else to do that for you. Believe me, I've been there. I've been in those meetings where you're deciding whether an application goes on the cloud or goes on your own infrastructure. I've run small businesses that ran servers literally in my basement, and we actually moved some of those to the cloud because it's a lot, right? If there's a power outage, those machines are down. It costs a lot of money to have that redundant power. It costs a lot of money to power them, right? So the cloud is a really attractive thing, and it has its use cases, right? The problem is so many people, so many services, so many applications have become so dependent on cloud services, whether that's for their DNS resolution or their infrastructure hosting, or perhaps their load balancing, or all the pieces that we just talked about today, their databases, their data storage, their S3 buckets, right, where you're storing all of your data at. If all of that lives in a cloud provider, and that cloud provider starts to have issues, then you start to see problems like we saw Sunday into Monday of this week, where large swaths of the internet are inaccessible. Now, I've seen a lot of places, a lot of folks like me, a lot of news broadcasters, a lot of articles that I've read online about this incident that immediately start to blame the customer, right? Because when you deploy an application in the cloud, if you deploy it all in one data center, then, one region, then obviously that region could become a single point of failure. Now, you could argue one way or the other as to whether that is truly the problem here or not. Can you really blame Roblox and Signal and Fortnite for having not built the proper amount of redundancy into their cloud deployments? Probably. That's probably true. However, part of the attraction to the cloud is that it's cheap, or supposed to be cheap. And the reality is that once you get there, a lot of times it's not as cheap as you thought it was. And all of a sudden, that redundant infrastructure starts to feel like it's a little too much money. So I really can't blame, especially smaller businesses. Now, the names that I've recited there are not small. Signal, maybe. I don't know what kind of money Signal makes that they would be able to afford a large cloud bill. I'd imagine there's a significant infrastructure investment in cloud services to run Signal, and I don't know how they fund Signal, but things like Roblox and Fortnite, they're services that people pay for, right? So you'd expect that they would have a larger pool to fund their services from. So maybe it's on them, but smaller companies, I can understand why it would be very expensive to build that sort of redundancy even into your cloud services. I did want to call out that there's a second article in the notes for today's show from techpolicy.press, and it basically goes into some of the problems that I just started to outline. So if you're curious and you want to go read it, I recommend it. Some of the same opinions that I just shared are echoed within this article as well, right? So yeah, it's about as much as I'm going to say on that, because I don't want to just turn into old man shouting at clouds. Yeah, I'm older than I look. Trust me. All right, our next article for today goes into the gaming world, and because I love talking about gaming on Linux, and this one's actually a really cool one. There's been a recent release of a new handheld gaming system, the Asus, I think it's pronounced ROG, it's just ROG, Xbox Ally X, and this is an attempt at a handheld Xbox gaming console, and it released recently. I didn't get a chance to look at exactly when it released, but it's a relatively new device. And it was received actually pretty well on launch day, and people liked it, and it's actually a pretty pleasant way to run Xbox games in a portable fashion. But unfortunately, people started to pretty quickly notice problems with things like it's running on top of Windows, as you might expect from a Microsoft console. But the version of Windows that's running on the thing is a little bloated. And it runs things like Microsoft Teams. Why is Microsoft Teams on there? But as you'd expect, I mean, come on, I generally have a negative opinion of Windows, right? So maybe I'm not the right one to talk about a Windows handheld gaming machine, but it's in the article, so I'm just going with what I'm reading here. Anyway. And then on top of that, the user interface that's built into the system that lets you run your games is also a little clunky. People said that it leaves a bit to be desired, leaves some room for improvement. So that is, of course, until someone decided, let's try to put Bazite on it. Well, they succeeded, and they said not only does Bazite run really well, it actually feels like you're holding a Steam Deck after you're done putting Bazite on the thing. There's even a video in the article that I've got linked here showing you the usability of this device with Bazite on it. But you gain a significant amount of frames per second in, I'd say, every game that they tested in this article. See, there's these tables of results in here for testing that folks have done. So I think it's a little bit ironic that this machine that was built specifically to run Windows, specifically to run Xbox games, has this much of a performance increase just by switching to Linux. All right, on to our next article. This comes from the Applied Social Media Lab at Harvard. Yeah, Harvard has one of those, because of course they do. Why wouldn't they have an applied social media lab? All right, the Fediverse gets a fuzzer. All right, what's a fuzzer? Maybe you don't know what a fuzzer is, but a fuzzer is a tool that is meant to throw a bunch of input at something. A lot of penetration testers use fuzzers to throw garbage at an API endpoint or at a login box or something to try to see if they can get it to do something it's not supposed to. Well, in the programming world, a fuzzer is more like a quality assurance test, right? You run a fuzzer against an API endpoint, or you run a fuzzer against, something that is supposed to accept input and see how it reacts. Well, the Applied Social Media Lab at Harvard has developed a fuzzer for ActivityPub. So if you're designing an ActivityPub or a federated social media application and you want to test it to make sure it's not going to fall over when you put it into production, you can launch this fuzzer against it, and it sends not just garbage at it, but traffic that is common on social networks, commonly sent at ActivityPub interface. So you can see, based on common traffic patterns, if your application is going to hold up to those things. And I think that's pretty cool, because, how many times have you written an application and then you're worried about what's going to happen once it goes into production? And in this case, you have one more test that you can launch against your federated platform before it goes live. So pretty cool. Okay, our next article is from OMG Ubuntu. me covering Ubuntu. I know that probably seems a little bit ironic, but I try to be fair on this show, unless we're talking about Windows. So the GIMP has announced that the official snap package for Ubuntu is going to go underneath their own development. Now, previously there was a snap package that existed for GIMP, and if you're not familiar with snap, it is I'll say somewhat proprietary, although it's not proprietary. In effect, it's proprietary. It's a package manager full of prepackaged applications for Ubuntu because no one else has really adopted it. I shouldn't say it's proprietary, but no one else is really using it. So it is an Ubuntu thing. It's like a containerized application, kind of like Flatpak, a little bit like AppImage, right? So anyway, when the Snap Store was created, the Canonical, who backs Ubuntu, had built a community called Snapcraft. Now, I don't know exactly how this formed. I may be getting the details wrong, but I know that Snapcraft is associated with Canonical, and they're basically propping up the Snap Store to make sure that there are applications there that people care about. They were maintaining the GNU image manipulation program, which is the GIMP, so that it existed in their Snap Store. And now the GIMP project has decided to take it under their own ownership. So now they are building the Snap Store build of the GIMP. This is a good thing, I think, for folks who want to run the GIMP, because now it means that it's being built by the people that know the project the best, the people who run the project. This doesn't change how you install GIMP. You can still go and get it using the normal apt packaging platform that you might be familiar with on Ubuntu. But if you want to use it using the Snap, you can now get it, and it'll come directly from the GIMP community, which I think is pretty cool. I think it's good that they're owning it themselves so that they can build it the way they think it should be built, and they get to own their own code or own their own distribution. All right, our next article is unfortunately from the Register. I don't love to cover the Register because I feel like they're a little too rage baity for my taste, especially when it comes to open source software, and especially when it comes to Red Hat, which I have some opinions about. But the Fedora Council has changed their policy on accepting AI-generated code. Now, about a year ago, maybe a little less, the Fedora Council had decided that AI-generated code was a big no-no. You could not submit AI-generated code to the Fedora project. And personally, I feel like that may have been a little bit short-sighted, but it could be that they did that because they had to make some more, they had to think some deeper thoughts about how exactly you could use AI-generated code. Now, I get it, right? AI-generated code generally has a bad name because, humans aren't writing it. Oh, it's crappy code. Oh, it's whatever. I get that. Believe me, I get that because we see AI generating content all over the place that is kind of slop. But anyway, what they've changed is they are not just wholeheartedly embracing the AI generated code, but they're encouraging its use as an assistant, not as an AI first sort of model where you're just generating the code and slapping it into a project. And if you do generate code with AI and you put it into and you submit it under your own name, you're on the hook for that. If there's something wrong with that code, if there's some issue with it, if it causes problems, if it has a bug in it, your name is still associated with that. You can't just dust your hands and say it was made by the AI. Personally, I feel like all the problems that people have outlined around AI, anything generation, content generation, or code generation, we have to accept it. We have to accept that this exists now, and we have to try to embrace it and put some guardrails around it. Because otherwise, if you just turn your back on it, you're going to fall behind because everyone else is going to be using it. And maybe you can stand on your high horse and say, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't stand on a horse. Maybe you can sit on your high horse and say that your stuff, whatever you're generating, whatever you're creating, is better because it was made by a human. But at the end of the day, that doesn't change who got to market first. It doesn't change who has the higher adoption rates. It doesn't change who has more features, because when you let AI do the things for you, it can do it a lot faster than humans can. Now, humans can generally make things of higher quality. So this idea of an AI assistant is so much better, I think, than this model where you just let AI generate stuff. Say you're writing code, you need help with a certain piece of logic. You ask your AI assistant, how would you write this logic? And it creates a block for you, and then you tailor it to the thing that you're trying to create, and then you put it into your code. Same thing goes for content generation, right? If I'm writing something, I do that a lot. I write blogs, I write other things. If I'm having trouble with coming up how to word something, heck, I use AI to help me come up with the articles to cover in this very show. I ask it, I review the stuff. I don't just take its word and recite it back to you all. I parse it and I learn from it and I give you my opinions, right? That's an AI assistant. That's not AI making a show for you. So anyway, I digress. The point is here that I think they've made the right choice here, that accepting an AI assisted code model is probably a lot better in the long run than flat out rejecting AI generated code. All right, and that's a wrap for today, folks. Thanks for watching, and remember to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll catch you in a week.